I live in a small house in a pretty stable neighborhood, and I work from home too. I have an office upstairs in a little room with my desk right by the window facing the front yard. I love being able to open it up for fresh air or to enjoy the view on a nice day. It was early fall, so I had the window open all day. On a regular weekday around noon, I was working at my desk when I noticed something outside the window. There was a man standing at the end of my driveway, not walking by or stopping to tie his shoe or anything. He was just standing there staring up at my house. I wasn't sure if he could see me through the window, but after a few seconds of me looking at him, he walked away. I thought that was really weird, but I didn't think much more of it. I mean, I had to wonder, or think about it, or something else. I just kept working. Every now and then I'd glance outside, but I didn't see anything else. I wasn't too worried about it. The next day I stuck to my usual routine. I went to my office and stayed busy all day. I had a ton of videos to handle. During one call with a colleague, I got distracted and glanced out the window again. The same guy was standing in the exact spot at the end of the driveway, staring up at the house just like before. This time it felt 10 times creepier. Why was he back? I must have stared at him for a while because one of my colleagues noticed I seemed off and asked if everything was okay. I said yeah, and tried to focus back on the meeting. I kept looking over even though he just stood there for a minute, then I glanced again and he was gone. The rest of my workday felt really heavy. I couldn't stop thinking about this random guy staring at my house. When I finished work, I went outside and walked around my driveway looking for any reason why he'd be staring up at my place. Everything seemed normal, but I realized my office window was clearly visible from where he was standing. That meant he could see me watching him. I headed back inside and made dinner. That evening I called my brother and mentioned it to him. He agreed it was strange, but said it was probably nothing. After we hung up, I sat down and watched some TV, hoping to forget about it. A few hours passed, maybe around 9 p.m. I turned off the show because I was tired, but with the volume low, I heard what I thought were footsteps outside my house. I jumped up from my chair and stared at the front door. The footsteps stopped for a brief second, then kept going. I rushed to the door and peeked through the peephole. I could barely make out a shadowy figure walking away down the street after they'd already gone. I flung the door open and noticed a note stuck to the back of it. It was short, just saying, "Pat, come open the door." I wasn't just confused, I was terrified. How did they know my name, and what did that even mean? They didn't even knock or stick around long enough for me to answer. Either way, I wasn't going to open up, but that was enough for me to call the police. 2 officers showed up, and I told them everything. Unfortunately, they couldn't do much, even though they wrote it all down and said to call if anything else happened. That didn't make me feel a whole lot better. I stayed up late that night lying in bed and couldn't sleep. I just lay there for hours, thinking about the guy lurking around my house and that creepy note he left, and then right around 2 a.m. there was a knock on the front door that echoed through the house. The house was dead silent, and my body froze up. The silence was deafening as I listened in fear. After a few seconds, they knocked again and my heart started racing. I grabbed my phone and called 911. They sent officers right away, but the knocking kept going the whole time I was waiting. It was strangely steady. It never got louder or more frantic or aggressive. Just constant knocking as I paced my hallway. The dispatcher told me the police were outside in about 2 minutes, and right after that, there was a longer pause in the knocking. 15 seconds, then 30, then a full minute passed before the officers arrived. No one was at the door. They were too late again. I explained what happened, and this time they seemed a bit more serious, but still not enough to take real action. They said they'd have a patrol car check around for a few weeks. Those weeks went by, and that guy never showed up at my door or the end of the driveway again, at least as far as I know. Months have passed now with no other incidents, but I still get chills thinking about that creepy note telling me to open the door and then the knocking at 2 a.m. And the thought that they might come back lingers in my mind. I have no idea what they wanted, who they were, or if they've really vanished for good. This was back when I was a freshman in high school. The town I lived in was small, and I guess you could say pretty old school compared to places today. It was all surrounded by forests, and the buildings and houses weren't packed together. My house was in the woods. My parents had a decent piece of land, and my dad built the place with his grandfather. Anyway, there weren't any real roads or driveways, just dirt paths. So the school bus didn't stop at our house. I had to walk about a mile to a friend's house to get a ride, or just keep going straight to school. Usually I just walked the whole way. It was a normal day for me. I was walking down the path from my house enjoying the peaceful morning sounds of the forest when I spotted a car up ahead. It wasn't my parents' car, or anyone's I knew, and it was just parked on the path which only leads to and from our house. So having someone there was unusual. I don't think I'd ever seen a random car there before. I felt a little uneasy having to walk past it. There was a woman inside. She looked around 35 or 40 with dark circles under her eyes and messy black hair. She glanced at me, but I just looked down. I could feel her eyes on me as I walked by. I picked up the pace and got to school. That evening at dinner I told my parents about it and asked who she was and why she was there. Both of them looked worried and confused. They told me she might just be lost and that I shouldn't worry, but I could see the concern in their eyes. They started driving me to school for the next week. That was odd because they both usually started work around 6 a.m., so they must have called in late. They did it all week just to drop me off. Honestly, I thought it was overkill since I felt old enough to handle it myself, but I knew they just wanted me safe. The following Monday morning, I packed my bag and started walking. The previous week, when they dropped me off, we never saw the woman or her car again, so I wasn't really worried anymore. But this time, when I got to the same spot in the woods, she was there again, sitting in her car and watching me. I nearly had a heart attack. This was way too coincidental. Randomly showing up twice on our path, which is basically our driveway, sitting in the same spot and only appearing when I was alone. I decided to cut through the woods instead of walking past her again. She started her car and drove closer. I stepped off the path a bit, but the woman noticed right away. She started her car and drove toward me. I pretended not to notice and walked faster into the woods. I heard her car door open and her footsteps crunching on the leaves behind me. But then she called out my full name in this weird, calm, almost affectionate voice. I turned around and looked at her. She had this dead stare, a blank expression, tired and heavy eyes. She looked really unwell. I took off running and didn't stop until I lost her. Then I looped back through the woods to my house where I called my parents. They called the police and came home right away. What I didn't expect was that my parents knew exactly who she was. Turns out she was my dad's ex-wife from almost 2 decades ago. Apparently, she'd had mental health issues for a while and would have these obsessive episodes that led to scary behavior. The day I told them I saw her, my parents reported it to the police, knowing it had to be her. The police didn't do much, though. They just checked on her and said she seemed fine that week, even though she'd been watching our house. Knowing that, and with my parents going to work early, it meant I'd have to walk to school on my own again. My parents never told me what happened to her after that, or what she was trying to do with me, or why she did any of it. Hopefully nothing like that ever happens again. This was back in 2019. I was working at a grocery store, often closing shifts, and living alone in a small 1-bedroom apartment. We had a lot of regular customers at our store. People who came in all the time and usually at the same times. One of them was this guy who showed up right before closing a few times a week. No one knew his name, but everyone knew him because no one liked customers who came in 10 minutes before closing. Usually I was the only cashier dealing with him. He was always a bit off, didn't say much, and always looked tired. That night he came in like usual just before closing, grabbed a few things and headed to the register. I scanned his items, he paid and left. We didn't exchange more than a simple hello. 10 minutes later, I closed the register and spent a few minutes cleaning up, clocking out, and left at 10:15. When I got to my car, I noticed the man was still in the parking lot. He was standing awkwardly by his car with his hands at his sides, just staring at the store. I got in my car and drove home. The next day I was off work, so I stayed up a bit later than usual. I didn't go to bed until around 1 a.m. Just a few minutes after I got under the covers, a bright light shone into my bedroom through one of the windows. I figured it was a neighbor pulling in, so I didn't think much of it. After a second the light went off, and I just assumed it was headlights. That was it. I fell asleep a few minutes later. I woke up in the middle of the night thinking I heard my phone ringing. I was half asleep and groggy, so it was hard to tell what was real and what wasn't. I rubbed my eyes and checked my phone on the nightstand. Nothing there, no messages or calls. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I tried to brush it off and go back to sleep since I wasn't fully awake yet. But then something small caught my eye as I rolled over. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, not enough for light to get in, or anything, just not flush with the frame because it wasn't latched. I always keep my door closed, so seeing it like that woke me up fast. I got out of bed and walked over to push it shut, checking if it was stuck or something. It clicked into the frame like normal, so there's no way I accidentally left it open. I felt my body start shaking, my heart pounding, but even though everything pointed to something wrong, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I racked my brain for any harmless explanation, but then I thought about that light I saw before falling asleep. I went to the window and peeked through the curtains. There was a car parked in my driveway. I could only see the back half, but I immediately felt panicked. Who was at my house, and was someone inside with me? I hurried back to the door and turned on the lights. I stood there by the door, freaking out and thinking I should call 911 to be safe. I looked over at my nightstand, saw my phone lit up, and right before I stepped toward it, I spotted an eye staring back at me through a crack in the closet door. My body trembled and I gasped, then turned and bolted out of the house. I found a neighbor who answered their door and I called the police from there. At least 15 minutes had passed. The car was still in my driveway when the police arrived, but the man was gone. It didn't take them long to trace it back to him, and I felt sick when it turned out to be the guy from the grocery store. His reasons for everything were nonsense, but clearly he'd been watching me for a while and wasn't mentally stable. I think the only reason I woke up that night was because his phone rang while he was hiding and he silenced it as soon as I stirred. If that hadn't happened, I don't know what would have gone down or if I'd even be here right now. Now though, I work at this really run-down bowling alley in my small town. It's a family-owned spot, super small and not the best. But in our town, it's one of the few places that's open 24/7 where people hang out, at least it used to be. In December, I had this creepy shift from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. The shift was almost always dead, and tonight was even emptier. There was a huge snowstorm rolling through our town right when I clocked in and took over. Not a single customer in sight. I spent about 2 hours cleaning all the lanes except one just in case a group showed up. I checked the windows. The parking lot was empty and snow was piling up. I wasn't sure if anyone could even drive through the lot with that much snow unless a plow came by. After a while, I pulled up a chair by the window and sat down, just staring outside and taking a break since there was nothing else to do. The place doesn't have cameras, let alone anyone monitoring them, so chilling out on slow days or even dozing off is easy. About an hour later, there was a loud noise from the back of the bowling alley. I think I dozed off when it happened, but it jolted me awake. I got up from the chair and headed toward the back room. I had no idea what was going on. Maybe it was related to the snowstorm outside. The back room is where we store all the bowling balls and the machines that run everything. As I looked down, I saw. Basically, it's a long hallway that runs the length of the building. When I opened the door, it was pitch black. At first, I didn't hear or see anything until I looked down and noticed water dripping down the hallway and what looked like distinct footprints. My face went pale. "Hello, who's in here?" I started walking down and called out a few more times before I spotted something taped to the wall. It was an envelope with what looked like Polaroid photos of me working alone that night. There were some of me cleaning the lanes and just walking around, and one that was really close, like a few feet away from me while I was sitting by the window. It seemed like they were right there. I felt like I was about to pass out. I ran back out the way I came and straight to the front desk, dialing 911. I tried to wait a minute, but the silence in the building and not knowing what was happening just made me more anxious. I waited despite the weather. The police. I ran to my car and waited there despite the weather. The police actually got there pretty fast, like in 2 or 3 minutes. Whoever was stalking me that night didn't leave any traces. Of course, the rundown place didn't have any cameras, so there was nothing else to go on. I have no idea what they were trying to do, or if it was just some sick joke or what. I haven't had anything else happen since then, but I quit a few months later.